2001, and I came there straight out of grad school. So it was a really neat opportunity. I interviewed a lot of places coming out of grad school, and I came away with 2 job offers. I could go to Blue Sky in New York and be a lighter, or I could go to Los Angeles to Rhythm and Hughes and be a rigger. And I was much more interested in the rigging side of things, even though most of other people from my grad school went more the lighting route. And the rigging thing fascinated me. So I packed it up and went off to Los Angeles to work at Rhythm and Hughes. And it was a really cool opportunity because the department I walked into had 4 riggers in it, and Rhythm and Hughes was doing a lot of work. So I was the 5th rigger in that department. So it was great getting to take on so much responsibility, for such a big studio at the time.
I heard, I think maybe I'm wrong, but the Rhythm and Hughes, the rigging department was quite small. I mean, like you were like 5 guys or something like that. It's that's true, or
Well,
it's
yes, it was true. So I started there in 2001, and I was the 5th person to sorry, there'd been some other riggers come and go, but I grew the team to 5 by being there. And soon after I started, 2 of the riggers started their transition into software development, and so they left the department. And it was around 2003 when we got awarded the work for Narnia that we finally were able to ramp up the size of the department. And so we grew that department overnight to like 15 riggers. I mean, it was for one project. We grew from 4 or 5 riggers up to about 15. And then for the rest of my tenure at Rhythm, that department I think hovered between 15 and 20 riggers. But it was an extremely efficient group. So yeah, it turned into a pretty big department. But Rhythm was known for a lot of character work. There was a tremendous amount of rigging to be done. It wasn't a real effects heavy shop. So there was always plenty of rigging work to do there.
Oh, that's nice. And obviously everybody saw these Voodoo demos that were released a few years ago. And yeah, there's a lot of nice stuff you had there that it's, it was, I think for everybody that was working on doing rigging, and there's some features that I'm glad that we still, I mean, we have some stuff now in Maya, some of there that I saw, like the Delta Mesh, for instance, that was what the Voodoo thing, the black Voodoo was magic.
Yeah, Voodoo was a really cool piece of software, and it was, it's different than other commercial software that's out there. It forked from the way that things are done traditionally in most software now 20 years ago. And it's not that it's a better way, it's just a different way. And the tools that were put together were extremely efficient. The focus at Rhythm and Hughes was throw money at efficiency. So they made things as efficient as possible. So making sure that we didn't lose work was a huge part of the rigging workflows we put in, and they did a really good job of it. I mean, matter of fact, the work that Rhythm did got a SciTech award for rigging, right? So all that stuff you're seeing in Voodoo is what they were awarded for, right? So it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal system that let things be topology independent, let things be way more procedural. And it was to a fault. Matter of fact, we had a commercials division that did commercials through Maya. And one time they used our film production pipeline to do a commercial in Maya. And everybody was used to changing the model at the last minute. You could have a character go through the scene, and you could be days from final, and they could change the model, and it wouldn't matter. And they got on this commercial, and they tried to do that in Maya, and it was way too late when they realized, like, oh no, we can't change a character design at the last minute. We can't do these things that were possible in Voodoo because it's too hard. We don't even have the staff here to redo the rigs. And it almost tanked the whole commercial because they were used to working in Voodoo and they'd switched over to Maya at the time. And it's just a different set of rules, right? When you're working within Maya, the different set of rules is, you have to understand how these changes impact pipelines. And that's really what we want to do now, is we want to make sure that, you get the best of both worlds from Maya and, procedural systems, so that you can have both, right?
Yeah, for real. I mean, now you can do. I mean, I do that all the time in Maya. Let's like 5 years or no more, I have been doing projects where I have to replace constantly the models because there is improvement, design changes, client adjustments, and and I see coming everything like from like design change from the client when we have an like several minutes animated like deliver. Oh wait, I don't to in one of the projects we ended up re-rigging stuff in at the light and comp stage because we do like a lot of anime style.
Yeah.
So there was some look depth lines on the eyes and things that didn't work correctly. Like like a lot of we here in Japan we do a lot like similar to what Spider-Verse in with
Yeah.
Sony did.
Beautiful work.
Yeah. So we do a lot of like some of the demos that I saw that was like, oh yeah, we do the same. It's not like here it was more like usual thing to do that. And well, basically the line didn't work and render, and they send it back to modeling. So we add the lines in geometry, we rig it everything, but in a way that we the animator didn't need to touch anything
Yeah.
and went to rendering. So we start rigging before animation, we end up rigging after animation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and you
And
want to be able to do that, right?
yeah.
You want to work in parallel. That's the way it should be. You should be empowered to do that. And I've given a lot of talks over the last 2 years, particularly around the last two Maya releases, where I've talked about the more procedural tools.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about Maya, everybody that works in Maya works with build scripts.
Yeah.
And it's because Maya is built on the idea of creation state.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have something that needs to be changed, you have to basically go recreate it. It's really not built for editing. And those are the things that we've been working hard to change over the last 2 years, to make it to where, like I like to say, expect change, right? You never start with the final model. No pipeline has ever given a rigger a final model and then left it alone. It just doesn't happen, right? You have to expect change. You have to expect this stuff to evolve. And you want to get started in the process. You don't want to have to wait for that model. You don't want animation to have to wait for the rig. You want to be getting as much of the pipeline working in parallel as possible. And that's really, really what I'm pushing to do inside of Maya now. And, and not just solve it as a one-off for one studio or another studio, but, solve it for an industry so that everybody can work that way,
Yeah, that's I mean, I totally agree with that. And yeah, maybe we can talk a little later about Maya and the new release, because I have a few questions for you that I would like to take advantage to now that I have your time, so I can ask. But then, so you went later for a little bit, a few years, I think, to Blizzard, where you've been. I guess in which I'm curious. It was more like for the like cinematic section or the in-game section? Like cinematics?
Yeah, I went to the cinematics group. And like I said, I was at Rhythm and Hues for a very long time. I was there for 14 years. And actually, when I go look back at my resume, not much of that was actually spent in the rigging department. I was the rigging supervisor for the department for the first 7 years. But for the last few years of that, I was off being a digital supervisor, and I was helping out with the department, but I wasn't actually engaging with rigging on a day-to-day basis. So at the end of my 14-year stint at Rhythm, when I went to Blizzard, I went back to being in the rigging department. I went back to rigging, and I did that in the cinematics group. And that was super rewarding to get to go back to like my passion, right?
That's
Because
great.
you do some things at studios where you head down a path and you just keep pushing forward, and you keep you keep taking promotions, or you keep taking your responsibilities because you can and you feel you're supposed to. But then one day you kind of stop and look around and realize that 90% of what you're doing is not your passion, right? You this small piece of your job that you still really love, but the rest of it is just not your passion. And so that was a really important thing for me when I went to Blizzard, is to make sure that I focused on what I enjoyed doing and what like my first love was, and what I really wanted to focus on. And there was there was even a time when I was at Blizzard, and my supervisor came to me and started talking to me. He's like, hey, we're looking for leads on projects, and would you like to be a lead on one of these shows? And I said, no, not really. It's like, if you want me to, I will happily do that. I'm a team player, I'll do it. But I think it's more valuable if I spend my time doing, this research and development over here, or doing this. And I was like, if you need me to be a lead, let me know, and I'll be a lead. But it's not really something that I need to do. And he was a bit taken aback, but he was like, okay, we'll let you know. And it was just, I wanted to make sure that I was focusing on doing the things that I enjoyed doing.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes the people doesn't have that focus, and yeah, probably you had to go all the past to discover that what you like more is these things. So the other things, so must be the other way around. Some people that goes in the ladder to higher ranks or management or things like that, or like general CG soups, things like that, and they're really happy there and they want to go back. And some people they get in this spiral of, can I say no to that? And then when you realize it's like 90% of your time are meetings and things like that, just management, very Excel sheets and things like that are not
it's a lot
what
more
you
fun to
sign
get back
for,
on the
no, like,
box, right?
but you don't have time to even digest that by day. Sometimes it's like you need to sit back, take distance, and then realize, oh, wait a second, that's
the other thing I loved about Blizzard, it was a really cool opportunity for me. So when I started grad school in 1998, that's when Maya was released publicly. And so in grad school, that's what I learned was Maya. And then I went to Rhythm and Hues for 14 years, where just about all the software is proprietary. For the first 5 years I was there, they used a proprietary modeler. They eventually switched over to Maya for modeling. But the animation system was proprietary. The rendering system was proprietary. Almost everything was proprietary. They used Houdini for effects, and they used Maya for modeling, and everything else is proprietary. So as a digital effects supervisor, I was working with modelers all the time. I was working with Maya, and we'd get shots in from previs and things like that. But I was not in a Maya pipeline. And so my time at Blizzard was very important to my development, because that was the first time I'd been in a Maya first pipeline, like all the way through. Their modeling is in Maya, their rigging is in Maya, their animation is in Maya, lighting, right? So the whole system was Maya. And so those 2 years at Blizzard was really my first time really, very working deeply inside of Maya. And I don't think I could do the job I do now with that experience, without that experience, because I bring a very interesting perspective to Maya, having been 14 years in proprietary software, but I don't have this huge learning curve because of those 2 years I spent working in Maya at Blizzard. Blizzard got to be my learning curve, and it was a great place to do that, because they're an awesome group of people.
I think the department from Blizzard, the cinematics department, it's legendary. I remember like the first like StarCraft, some of these, like, when they assembled this marine with all the armor, that it was with a cigar, and that was epic. And all the cinematics that came from this department, still coming out, are amazing all the way.
And they blew my mind. The quality of it blows my mind, but also the turnaround. I was shocked at how fast those things would go from ideation through execution to final. Like it would just be head spinning. I when I was working at Rhythm, we could have never turned a project around that fast. It was amazing the way they did it. So I learned a lot at Blizzard. It was a really cool place to kind of get my feet wet in the Maya community.
Well, you get the fit, and then you jump it to like straight like to the pool, no? Like, so and now you're an Autodesk, and so I wanted to ask you, which I was checking your title, and this is something we talked off mic before, but I just want to recap for the people that maybe it's curious, like me. It's a senior product owner. What is that, or what do you do in this role position? Because I'm very curious. So you can explain a little bit
it's
how.
really interesting. So once you moved into software development, it's a different world than production, and they do things slightly different. They organize teams different. They work around an agile principle. Now, you're going to have pipeline development teams and things like that may work with agile methodologies or something like that in studios. But for the most part, you have a different way of working when you're in production versus at a software company. And I was brought into Autodesk because of what they call domain experience. Basically, you're a subject matter expert. Therefore, we think that there's some value in having you on our team. And honestly, they've placed subject matter experts at different roles within the company. It's not always the same thing. It's not always product owner. And when they hired me as what was the title? I think it was principal user experience designer. And I think 2 or 3 weeks into the job, they said, "No, you're a product owner." they switched titles. They were like, "No, that doesn't quite cut it," right? And so it's interesting when you have domain experience and you're working for a company like this, you kind of straddle some of the lines, and maybe there's not an exact box for you to fit in. You're kind of an experienced designer, you're kind of a product owner, you're kind of these different things. But basically, the role that fit me best was this product owner role, which is when they say product owner, it doesn't mean, hey, you're the product owner for Maya. What they'll do is they'll take a segment of Maya, like rigging, and say, okay, you're going to be the product owner for rigging. And at Autodesk right now, I'm the product owner for rigging, and I'm also the product owner for USD, which is Pixar's universal scene description. So those are the two areas that I'm responsible for. And what that means is, a product manager, my boss, would come to me and say, okay, we're going to focus on rigging. We need to improve these things. And this is the size team you're going to have. You come back with a plan on what improving rigging means, what that looks like, what areas need to be touched. How do we need to move this product forward to make it successful? And then I will take that, I will make those pitches, I will justify it to him, I'll justify it to other people. And then I work with a development team. I break things up into stories that they can work on. I prioritize the backlog for them of stories, and I work very closely with the development team to keep these things moving forward towards a release. And that's effectively what a product owner is.
Yeah, the people when you meant stories, it's agile development. So maybe the people that doesn't, can you briefly explain what stories are? And just because the people is gonna get like, you write stories, what kind of stories? Sci-fi?
That's a very good point, because there's a whole new language when you get into agile development and Jira, and everybody's talking about epics and stories and story points. You're like, what is all this stuff? A story is just basically you take something and you break something up into bite-sized tasks, and you create that task and you log it. It's just like in any issue tracking system. We use Jira, but you log that task, and it's and then you prioritize that, and that's what the development team is going to go work on. And so your goal is just to make sure that those stories are written with what I'm supposed to be doing is working with customers, gathering all the requirements and presenting those requirements to designers, working with the designer to write these stories, which are just bite-sized tasks that development can take on. And then we hand that off to development. I make sure it's prioritized, and we make sure they execute. And then I'll also work with QA to make sure that what's coming out the other side of development is meeting all the requirements that were spec'd out.
Yeah, like I guess like a lot of digest information from different clients, different users that have common goal, but there's not exactly taking the same path to that goal, let's say. So you need to kind of assemble that in a let's say a common road that everybody it's happy to transit.
You have to kind of aggregate everybody's needs, and you have to kind of align it with a big picture. There's a certain amount of capacity for bug fixes, a certain amount of capacity for polishing older features, and there's a certain amount of capacity for trying to break new ground. And you have to balance all that and get it through. And it's just like any production would be. You have a limited number of resources, and you have to make sure that you're using those in a way that move things forward in a meaningful way for your users. And like you said, there's users, there's small, there's individuals, there's very large companies, there's people using the product for film, there's people using the product for games, people using the product for animation, there's people using the product for automotive, right? So like you have a huge customer base, and you're working with a product that is been around for 20 years and is a really strong framework for a ton of workflows, right? It can enable so much because it's so extensible through scripting. And so you have studios out there that have 20 years of workflows built on top of what you're dealing with. So it's kind of like playing Jenga. When you're messing with something at the base, like something down at the foundation of Maya, you really have to be cautious about what sort of impacts you're going to be having across this whole customer base.
I had a little taste, a little teaspoon of this with my little with M gear also. It's fairly little for a whole project like Maya, but yeah, we have a lot of people that is contributing now, like some people sending pull requests or commits and things, and it's great because it's what I mean. You cannot ask for more for a nice community that helps, but at the same time there is some things that are really great, but it or slightly breaks back compatibility or change the workflow or something, or just change something that is very base for the rest. So when you have all these like users relying on that, and you cannot just release a new version that breaks completely, or unless you have to put like alternative, like, okay, this is the option, but you can still do it in your ways, and then it gets, and then I mean, it's just a grain of salt on the whole thing. I know it's I mean, it cannot compare, but I feel the same. Like sometimes it's hard to, once you have a user base, to move forward in one direction that maybe it's more straight than just going and looking for
well, you mentioned MGR being open source. Like, the USD project I'm on is an open source project.
Yes, true.
And it finally got to a really good point of critical mass as we were nearing shipping it, because it shipped in my 2022. But it's plugin that can go out separate because it's open source. So keep that in mind if anybody's interested in USD. But really, what was really cool, as we approached Code Complete, we started getting some great contributions. We started getting some awesome pull requests from Apple and from Pixar. And what was cool about it is they were hitting areas that weren't currently a priority for us, but were a priority for them. And what's tricky about that is, as those come in, it's great. It's not free code though, because you have to test it, and it might change a design or touch on a design that you weren't ready to implement yet. And so you have this awesome pull request in there, and you have to figure out how can you integrate it, or can you integrate it yet? You want to take it, but can you take it yet because you have something else that taking it isn't free. Sometimes when you take it, you still have to put a UI on top of it or run it through QA. They have to test it and things like that. And that can be challenging. And then when you think about like 20 years, I think when you go back to the rigging problem, like with Maya 2020, we made a huge change. We changed the underlying transform model of Maya. Like that sounds like, if you look at the change on the surface, it's minimal. Most people don't even notice it's there, but the offset parent matrix, one new attribute, which lets you inject a matrix into the transform, makes a huge difference in what you can do in Maya. But doing that changed the underlying transform model entirely, right? Like putting that one matrix multiplication in there changes the way so many things work and has the potential to break so many plugins. If people are accumulating their own matrices instead of using the Maya tools, the APIs to do it, their stuff would start to break, right? So it was a really risky change. And the Maya transform model is more complex than it needs to be. There's a lot of extra math in there that if I could, I would have scrapped the whole transform model and started over with a cleaner one. And there's a transform model for transforms. There's a transform model for joints, right? Because there's a slightly different one. Certain things are suppressed.
We have some conversations on that in the past, I remember.
And so the offset parent matrix was a way to kind of compromise on keeping backwards compatibility, keeping things working, but still unlock some new behaviors in there. But it's certainly not the nuclear option, which is, hey, let's just break everybody's transforms and joints and put in a simpler transfer model that's going to take us to the future and have every customer in the world mad at us. Right?
This is one of the things. I mean, we still on MGR we do the all way the connections. So because we have to keep backwards compatibility. Obviously, that's one thing. I mean, if the rig should be working in 2018 and needs to work in 2020, and of course, if we use the parent offset matrix in 18, basically will not build. It is not doesn't
Yeah.
exist there. So and recently we did one custom solver for us that it removed a lot of the let's say the nodes in between we had to do matrix operations, because under the, I mean, even we connect with the old system, the under the hood is all matrix multiplication, so it would be easier for us to plug you directly to the parent. And we created like just another custom component that it get rid of like around for each node, between 4 to 6 nodes get removed or replaced by this node that does under the hood all the stuff. So we work in like matrix space all the time, like word matrix things, and then we just have one node that speed out the rotation translation scale share, and that's it. So but yeah, I want to in the future to get also rid of these, and I'm just waiting so you have maybe 2 or 3 versions, maybe 2 is gonna be enough, so you have like unless backwards like 3 versions.
Well, you bring up another point that impacts, adoption rate, right? Like we can put out some really groundbreaking features. In fact, I feel that Maya 2020 and 2022 have completely changed the game in how you can rig in Maya. But when are we going to start seeing that in productions? I mean, think about MGear, right? MGear, you're looking at offset parametrics and going, we want to adopt that. That would make this easier. That would make this faster, right? But we can't adopt it because we have to support version 2018 or whatever backwards versions you're supporting, which means that all the customers out there that rely on MGear, they can't adopt offset parent matrix, right? And so they may want to, or they may not even know what it is. And if you were to adopt it, it would just be faster, and they'd be like, "Wow, MGear is amazing," right? So, but that speaks to adoption rate, where it's like, okay, we put in features, and some of these features we won't really know the true impact for a year,
I
2
feel
years, 3 years,
now.
right? No. But that's the same thing with all pipelines, right? Like everybody has tooling built around this stuff. So when you're dealing with individuals or with students or people that are just getting into it, they can play with all this new stuff and get going. But when you're dealing with these other studios that have big machinery in place, some of them are in a position where they can adopt the latest and greatest at all times. And they're super lucky that they get to do that. But there's others that just have legacy. There's a lot of games out there where the pipeline can be so fragile that they don't want to touch anything, not even the Maya version. So I've seen games that are still trying to run on Maya 2012, and you're like, wow, like I don't know how to help you, because there's so much has changed between now and then, and it's just because they're really locked into that pipeline. They have so much machinery built around that version that it's too fragile for them to risk making the change. So that happens everywhere, and you have the 20 years of history in workflows, and then you have everybody who's built their workflows on top of that. So when you make these changes, it's like trying to steer a giant aircraft carrier and get it turned around. Like you make these subtle changes, and you hope they really move the needle.
It's like this. I think it was in Europe, in the that get the transoceanic. Do you saw the news on that?
The Suez Canal?
Yeah.
Well, that's what you do. You try to turn it without jamming up everybody's Suez Canal, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because once you hit that, everybody's production stops. You're like, maybe we took it too far.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, it's I think it's the name of the game. Sometimes, like, you need to what is the ideal, where's the reality, and you aim for the ideal with a fit on reality, and that's where we play mainly all our games. Or
and we try to end of life things, and we try to deprecate things where we can, but it's difficult to deprecate things, because you always have to dig through analytics to find out how much is this feature getting used. Is it safe? Like the first step is it starts disappearing from menus, right? Like you start removing the easy access to it, so it's still there, it'll still work, you can still create it, but you start it starts wait, where it's not in the menu anymore, and then it can be a several release process to get rid of something.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still using, for instance, a lot the old like my artisan brushes. A
Yeah.
lot.
And
I use all
artisan
like
code is everywhere in Maya. There's a lot of artisan stuff
yeah.
that you touch on.
Yeah, no, but well, we have now the new Sculpt system. Well, it's not that new; it's a few years back, but still, I still use both, like the new and the old. And probably if you remove the old one, it's gonna oh no, and yeah, I imagine there are more people on different using different tools and will have same situation. It's difficult, yeah.
Yeah.
The so maybe we can jump, like we already jump on the Maya side of the things, but I would like you to just well, to talk a little bit about the new features on Maya 2022. The obviously I'm very interested on the rigging part, but we can touch other features if you want to just go and have a broader view. But one of the big features for me, well, there's uh, two big features, or let's say, and well, I think all are big, but like the component tags and the deformation falloffs are, I think, are the two that like really get me excited as a rigger. Like
Yeah.
that, I think it's a big uh like big game changer for us, like riggers, because it allows a lot of, yeah, look what you're saying, like proceduralism and flexibility in terms of
Yeah.
how you approach many tasks or many stuff that you do on the rigs. So maybe we can start with the component tag, if you feel like so.
Yeah.
Or
Would you mind if we started a little further back than that?
yeah, of course. We're
So, if I've been with Autodesk for 2.5 years.
mm-hmm,
So I've been around for the 2019 release. I was around for
mm-hmm,
the 2020 release and the 2022 release.
mm-hmm,
Um, when I came in for 2019, it was too late in the process for me to really contribute to that release. They had what they were going to ship. But at that time, they were about ready to go live with the pin nodes.
mm-hmm,
And unfortunately, one of my first acts as an employee at Autodesk was to pull those out of the 2019 release.
mm-hmm.
So I had to cut a feature, which did not make developers very happy. But what I knew we wanted to do is I knew that we needed proceduralism in Maya.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that everything that we put into Maya, once it's in, becomes somebody else's legacy to deal with.
Yes.
And if it was put in the wrong way, that it wasn't going to align with other methods of proceduralism. So while the pin nodes they had at the time were procedural, they weren't procedural in a generic way. They weren't.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something saying, "Oh, look, this is a generic way of controlling a transform through matrix operations." It was a procedural node, but it really didn't standardize all of that. And so I killed that. So everybody who's enjoying pin nodes in my 2020, you can blame me that you didn't get to play with them a year earlier in 2019. I'm the guy you can blame. And maybe I just outed myself because nobody even knew that was an issue until I just said it just now. But and the reason we did that, like I said, is for proceduralism. So 2020, we really got to spend some time changing things. And what we want to do is we want to build this procedural foundation in Maya, right? And that is getting rid of the idea of creation state and moving towards the idea of rest state and current state. Right? Once you have rest state and current state, you can do almost anything you need. Like the idea that people have to return to a bind pose to make a change is a bit absurd if you think about it. Like if you know your rest state, you should be able to make any kind of bind modifications you want in an animated pose state. Shouldn't matter, right? So in order to work with that foundation, the first thing we focused on around 2020 was transform, right? We wanted to look at the way transforms worked. We wanted to look at the transform model. And we already talked about this a little bit, but we introduced the offset parent matrix. And along with the offset parent matrix, once we had this matrix way of driving transforms, we wanted to have operators that could do matrix operations that can be fed into that. And that's where you get things like like the blend matrix and the aim matrix, right?
Yeah.
And now the pin nodes can have a matrix output, and they have something they can drive. They don't have to be decomposed into translation rotation channels to be used on a transform. So now those can be aligned with the other matrix operators and built in a very similar way, right? So 2020 shipped with all these matrix operations like pin nodes and blend matrices and aim matrices. And I think pick matrix was another one that lets you filter out matrix operations or matrix components, and then feed into this new transfer model. And then tacked in with that, we also shipped the proximity wrap, which was a GPU accelerated improvement, kind of a next generation wrap deformer. The goal originally was, the task originally was take the wrap deformer and GPU accelerate it. And our response was, why would we want something that people don't like to run faster? Right? There's so many reasons not to use the wrap deformer. Making it faster doesn't make it better. So let's not focus on GPU accelerating wrap deformer. Let's focus on reinventing the wrap deformer with something that is more procedural and GPU accelerated, right? So even though that fell on the deformation side, we built out the proximity wrap deformer, and that shipped with 2020. And then, I'm not sure if I touched on this yet, but there's some things that we like to do to move the ball forward that are, there's a phrase I heard another product owner at Autodesk use, which is batteries not included, which I love, right? It's this idea that we're going to put some powerful things in there that we don't yet have wrapped in a nice, pretty workflow for you, right? We're going to put in the plumbing, we're going to put in the architecture to start enabling you to do things. And not all of that is going to come wrapped in a pretty bow with a workflow. Like we want to do that. We want to do vertical slices. We want to make sure that we're giving you a nice, clean workflow. But some of these things are just too important to wait. We want to get them in your hands earlier, whether they have workflows on them or not. And I think you can see a tremendous number of examples of that in 2022. If you go look at Mateus's Twitter, he's getting in there and he's looking at a lot of those batteries not included features, and he's pushing them hard. And so in 2020, one of the batteries not included features was there was a mode for proximity wrap that was called cluster mode. There was no way to set it up, no advice on really how to use it or what it does. But what that was doing is it was laying the groundwork for proximity wrap to be able to emulate, not only replace the wrap deformer, but give it a way to emulate and provide a topology independent method of skin binding. So cluster mode on the proximity wrap can mimic a skin bind. And so in 2020, that mode shipped, but there were no tools to set it up. There was no way for a user to, I mean, you could do it, but it took some deep diving and a lot of scripting to work your way around that, but the feature was there. So that brings us to 2022. So that was the emphasis in 2020 was really around transforms, rest state, getting this idea of proceduralism going, getting matrix-driven workflows into people's hands. And that brings us to 2022, which we turned our attention to deformation, right? So what we wanted to fix the foundational portion of deformation. And there were three main areas, and I'll talk about one that you haven't mentioned yet first because it's the shortest one. So one of the things that we noticed is we've put this effort into GPU accelerated deformation with this GPU override. The initial implementation of the GPU override had a lot of limitations to it. And I'll refer to things as blockers, because when I say we removed a blocker, that doesn't mean that something's suddenly going to evaluate on the GPU, but it means that one particular thing is no longer going to block GPU evaluation, right? You have to remove all the blockers for a chain to land on GPU. So one thing that improved GPU deformation silently in 2020, we didn't talk about it, but we had the underlying architecture there. When we were laying the groundwork for the component tags in 2022, we had a mock-up of those working back around the time of 2020. And to get that working, we had to change some things with the way GPU evaluation worked under the hood. And one of those things was the way subsets behave for the GPU. So if you had a deformer and you defined a membership, if that membership was anything less than every vert, it would block it from landing on the GPU. So with component tags, knowing that people would now start defining subsets more, one of the things we had to do is we had to make sure that that stuff could still land on the GPU. So having subset support for membership, removing that from being a blocker for GPU evaluation, that actually shipped in 2020. So if you go back, if you're in 2020 and you define membership on a GPU accelerated deformer, it'll still land on the GPU, whereas before it would not have landed on the GPU. So that's cool. So that's one blocker that was removed. The blocker we removed in 2022 is a common design pattern that a lot of people use in rigs, which is the fan-in design pattern. So if you have two GPU accelerated deformation chains, if you merge those chains together, the fact that you've merged them, we call it fan-in, where you have multiple deformation chains coming into one deformation chain, that fan-in design pattern was a GPU evaluation blocker. So everything upstream of that fan-in would not land on the GPU. You would only have the stuff from that merge down would land on the GPU. So now that evaluation blocker has been removed. So that's a really cool thing, because now you don't have to change a lot of the ways you rig to get things to land on the GPU. So with the subset landing blocker removed and with the fan-in design pattern removed, that's two blockers down, which are going to let a lot more stuff land on the GPU for evaluation. And I can't talk about forward-facing things, but just suffice it to say, we keep chipping away at that problem. Right? We want to make sure that we can knock down as many blockers as possible, because we don't want you to have to change the way you rig just to get something to land on the GPU. So that's a problem that we're chipping away at. So 2022 shipped with with fan-in design support for GPU evaluation. So that was a cool thing. So that was one of the first things, GPU. Then the other two things we wanted to tackle for deformation, one was topology independent procedural membership definition, and the other one was topology independent procedural weight definition, right? So those are the two things, membership and weighting. And I think most riggers that are probably taking the time to listen to this probably understand the distinction between membership and weighting. For those that don't, I'll briefly say membership is the components that you can act on, that you're going to calculate an effect for. And weighting is basically saying how much you're going to affect each one of those verts, right? And you can be more efficient with things if you know your membership is only going to be a small part of the geometry. By keeping your membership tight, you can reduce the overhead of some of the calculation, because you're not calculating deformation for the entire body and then only using weighting to dial it off, right? You're actually not calculating the membership for certain things. So membership and weighting are two important components. So saying all that, now we get to what you want to talk about,
Sorry,
which is membership. And our approach to membership is using component tags. You know what? I can probably pull up a video.
Can you share the screen, or let me?
Yeah, let me see if I can share my screen here.
It's not. Maybe I have to allow you.
Let's see. I haven't tried yet.
Okay.
But if I share screen. Okay. So I can share my screen here. Let me. I'm going to pull up a deck that we used in our webinar. If you haven't seen the webinar for the 2022 launch, there's a 30-minute section where I go into a lot of detail about this stuff. And this is the presentation deck I used in that. So some of these slides are going to be familiar to you.
I will. I'm taking note here. I will add a link to the webinar. It's also in YouTube. So the people can check it out on the description of this video.
Yeah. So component tags are, so the way membership has been defined in Maya before is you would have, you would basically say, hey, the membership I want to work on is this set, but when you created a deformer for a certain set of verts, it would create three things for you. It would create a group ID, it would create a group part node, and it would create a deformer set node. And all three of those things work together so the deformer knew which components it was working on. And it created all kinds of loops and weird cycle looking connections in your graph editor, which was kind of a pain. And so we looked at that and said, look, these components, the deformer knows what shape it's acting on, and the shape is the one that owns the components. So why can't the shape own the membership itself, right? So what we've done is we created component tags, which are simply named groups of components that live on the shape itself. And because they live on the shape itself, that means they travel with the shape. So when you have a shape node in Maya and you connect two shapes together, the component tags will travel with that shape. So they're always there. And here, this can show you a bit, this shows you what they look like when we're browsing these things. So there's a new component tag widget on the side there. And these are all just different component tags I've already created. Now, they have to be homogeneous, but you can choose different types of components. So you can have a face component set, or a vert component set, or a CV component set, or an edge component set. And that's what they look like in the browser. And they're just shapes that live on the, sorry, they're just sets that live on the shape itself. Little trivia for you. We used to call them group tags. Because Maya used group parts and group IDs, we're like, okay, well, this will be group tags. But when we thought broader about how we'd use them and to make sure people understood what they were, because group IDs and group parts didn't make sense to most people anyways, we abandoned the name group and we went to component because we felt it was more descriptive of what it was. So if I slip and call them group tags, it's because they were called group tags up until very recently.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing with the groups, I'm still saying groups to the sets because I came from Softimation. Groups are the equivalent in Maya it's sets. But I'm still calling this sets. Sometimes in my videos on YouTube, I call this this group, this, and the people goes crazy because in Maya groups are the transforms.
Yeah. Well, and that's
so
the thing.
I feel you. So you put groups here, it's gonna be also like.
I try not to get caught up on vocabulary. Really, what's really important is the underlying concepts.
Yeah.
Actually, that's what makes a strong rigger, in my opinion, is someone who really latches on to the concepts and not so much a specific piece of software or the way that one software does over another. I mean, anybody who's working in production is going to be working in pipelines that have multiple pieces of software in them. And the more you have a broad understanding of what's going on as opposed to a specific implementation, I think the more valuable you're going to be to your production, right?
Yes.
So that was just a video that showed component tag creation. So anyways, these shapes live on geometry and then they're consumed by a deformer, right? And so the deformer that consumes them uses what we call a component tag expression. So this video shows you how that's kind of powerful. So we have those predefined component tags already on the shape. I'll create a deformer here. So this is a cluster deformer on this whole character. But if you go look at the deformer, you'll see it's got a new widget as well. And it's got a component tag that says asterisk. And that means give me all verts. So it doesn't matter what verts. If you change the model, it's still going to deform all verts. And I changed it to pouch, which is one of the ones I defined. But this is a Boolean expression language. So I can say pouch plus strap. And now the strap's going to jump into the membership, right? If I want to go back, sorry, go ahead.
No, and it will show up like if you have different objects. Now you have a geometry, is mesh shape. I don't see, I'm not sure if I see the full name, but yeah, if you put like, you have like 3 elements that are affected by this cluster, or one deformer may affect different. So you will see here the
list. You see multiple lines for the deformer, which is cool because that widget is something that is backwards compatible with group parts and group IDs. You'll see them there as well. And I'll tell you a little secret on how that's working. So the reason that group tags are compatible with group parts and group IDs is because group parts and group IDs, if you pass a deformer a group ID of 0, the deformer sees it as invalid. Okay. And so what we've done is when you have a group ID of 0 on a deformer, it falls back to the component tag expression. So if you have a group ID that's 0 and your component tag expression is star, that means that any mesh you plug into this deformer, I'm going to deform all the verts, right? And what that means is this lizard could be a frog. Somebody could subdivide this lizard. Somebody could do whatever they want, and this deformation chain is going to keep working. You just reopen the file, and it's still working because we're not dealing with per vertex weights here, right? We're dealing with named groups. And even if you said this is working on pouch, as long as the new model you gave it has a component tag called pouch, it's just going to throw everything that's in pouch in the membership and start deforming it, which keeps it nice and procedural. So that's how these deformation chains can live side by side with each other, just with that group ID.
Yeah, and the way that like this proceduralism can be implemented, it's like, for instance, if you have like a pipeline, you have multiple characters, similar, like let's say morphology, but completely different topology, let's say. But you can ask maybe the modelers, okay, set these like component tags to define the different areas, so the rig can grab this and probably speed another version of the rig, just grabbing these areas, these component set tags.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find a video I had. Dang it, I wish I had. I know I posted it on Twitter. I try to post these things on Twitter as well.
Yeah, I removed my Twitter a few months ago, almost a year ago. I'm sorry. Yeah, I reopened a new Twitter for M Gear, but most to post like news about M Gear, things like that. But I didn't follow anybody, just a few like Maya and like few accounts just to have something. But yeah, sorry, I used to follow you, but
No,
now
it's
I'm
fine.
out of
It's
the.
fine. No, that's cool. And actually, here I'm gonna have to let's see. All right, I'm gonna have to pull up my Twitter here to see the one I was talking about, which is this right here. So this is live, right? This video right here. It's a GIF. Sorry, I can't seem to make it any larger. But this is one deformation chain. It's just got a switch node, and all these different meshes are coming into it. And so all I'm doing is animating the switch node here. And you can see the deformation chain's not changing. And this is all because component tags work, right? You say, hey, asterisk or torso or whatever it is. And as long as that group is defined, it's just going to keep working, right? And if you use asterisk, nothing needs to be defined. It's just going to say, look, if you're a mesh, I'm going to take all your verts and they're all going to be thrown into this deformation. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. It's something will save a lot of time.
That's the idea, right? The idea is that that you can make changes and not have a change be something that automatically means that you have to re-rig what you're building, right?
Yes.
So I can even show one of the things I think is really cool to look at is this video I have that really shows you kind of the goal of where I'm trying to get at with a lot of these things. And I'll pull this up. Let's see here. I'll present this one. There we go. All right. This is this putting it all together video, which this one is showing what happens when you can manage rest state and current state only, right? So this is just a pre-rigged lower body, right, from the waist down. Did I pause it? I must have paused it. So here, this thing is just all been pre-rigged, and here I am just animating it, testing it out, seeing what it feels like. But what's cool about this is I'm tracking the rest state of this rig. And I've rigged the rest state of this rig. Why is this? Oh no. All right, I got to find this video for you because this one is not playing all the way through. I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
This video is an important video, I think. Goodness, don't tell me I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, how depressing. I can't find it. Wasn't expecting that.
I mean, if you don't find it, maybe you can send it to me. I will try to insert it in some point.
Oh, you know what? This deck, I split it up into several slides so I could talk about it. All right, cool. So I can still do it.
Okay,
it's just been split out into multiple things here. So let me get that back up, and I will continue talking about it. Okay, so let's see. We talked about this one. This was me just playing with it. All right, so here I bring a mesh in, and like I said, I've rigged the rest state of this character, and so it's basically a rig of a rig. And what that allows me to do is auto-calculate joint orients and mirroring and everything on the fly, but the IK updates, because as far as the IK is concerned, the rest state of the rig, the rig is still at rest, right? So the IK just thinks like, oh, this is my new rest position, and it evaluates that way. So here I am, and I just fit this thing to the character here. And again, this demo was done for Maya 2020. So everything in here was doable as of 2020. It just gets better with 2022. So you can see the whole rig just updating itself. You can see mirroring is being done on the fly. Orientation, left and right orientation is all updating and keeping itself mirrored nicely. And then let's see, after this, I think it goes on to the next video. All right, so now I've got the new proportions. I haven't rebuilt the rig. This is all, technically this video should be one uncut thing. I apologize that it's not. But here's the character in the pose state. I can pose him out. And one of the things that you see a lot of riggers do, particularly if they're deep into a pipeline, is they'll have a deformation issue. And sometimes the deformation issue is due to bad weighting, but a lot of times it's due to poor joint placement and bad biomechanics, right? And rather than go and fix the biomechanical problem, because of where they are in production or because of how impactful the change is going to be, they try to paint their way out of it. They try to just deal with the weights, right? And one of the reasons is because of all that overhead. But in this system, what you would just do is you would just adjust the rest state. And you see the deformed animated state is just updating on the fly, right? So you can see it, it's mirroring, left leg, right leg are all updating. And so I can see in my pose state, I'm not going back to my bind pose to rebind this character. Like all the binds are rebinding on the fly, and I'm able to animate this guy, pose him out, and play with the rig proportions all in one file, right? Extremely powerful. And this might look like some of the demos you saw from way back in the day when I was at Rhythm. Some people put out some of those style workflows. And this is really the kind of workflow you want people to be able to have, is one where change is expected, change is not impactful to the process. And if you think about anybody in a build script pipeline who wants to change a knee joint position, think about all the things that they're trying to do, right? They probably go to a separate file that holds their skeleton. They're updating that. Then they're running some sort of orient scripts to keep all their hips and knees aligned, or they're using some tool to move it so that all those things stay aligned. And then they're flushing it back through the pipeline. They're running a build script. So each one of those micro movements I made is a stab in the dark with I don't know how long your build scripts are, 30 seconds, 40 minutes. I've seen both, right? Before they could see the results in a posed character. Whereas this one is, it's only as slow as the rebind calculation. So you can drag it in a lot of deformation chains are light enough where you can just manipulate it directly and watch it rebind on the fly and be like, that spot right there. And that philosophy, go ahead.
No, sorry, because this demo right now, it's 2020, so we are adjusting. So basically we resetting the bind pose as we move, so we can have the offset on the articulation, and it's updating live. But the skinning, the weight itself, they're not yet in this demo updating.
Oh, they are.
They are in this demo updating. Okay.
Yeah, this
so
is
because it's not clear on 2022 with the of course with the Falloffs, you can, I mean, it's what you say, like it's much more easier now to do it, no?
The reason this works is because this was using the proximity wrap, which, as you remember, I said shipped in 2020. And so the proximity wrap was already procedural and was going to do dynamic rebinds. So the proximity wrap already has the idea of a rest state for geometry. It introduced that for deformers, the original geometry plug that you can feed in. So it knows the rest state of all the geometries. It knows the rest state of the characters mesh. These deformations are being driven by pills. So there's pills fit to the bones. So it knows the rest state of each one of those pills. It knows the current state of each one of those pills. It knows the rest state of the character's geometry, and it's doing that rebind on the fly. And then all of the rig of the rig, I'm basically driving things into the offset parent matrix, for which the IK accounts for that offset parent matrix and its evaluation. So I'm doing the math in the graph to get that offset parent matrix to behave like a rest state. And as I move those positions, that rig of the rig is handling orientations with point ats and aims, and the pills are getting automatically resized by using locators to build the pills procedurally. And that's updating the pills rest state and their current state. And all of that leads to a demo where you see these things all dynamically updating on the fly.
I see.
And this is super powerful. This goes all the way back for me to actually Narnia back in 2003. And we were trying to get the proportions right for Aslan, the lion, the lead character of that show. And animation came to me and said, look, we cannot get this prototypical lion pose where he's laying down, but his knees are up above his spine. So you get that silhouette where the classic lion pose where his knees are above his spine. Yeah, and or actually his hindquarters, right? Getting those knees up above the spine in the back. And all the proportions of the character were spot on. Like this thing had been researched, the model was pristine. but the rig wasn't working. And we were looking at it, and I was like, okay, well, if you want to do that, you need to slide the foot back. You need to move the heel back. And they're like, no, we can't move the heel. That's where the foot needs to be. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to need to drop the hips a little and maybe tuck that up forward. And they're like, nope, can't move the hips either. It's like, okay, well, the only thing left is changing the length of the bones because we're constrained by a triangle here, right? It's a rear leg. So how about we give you some controls to lengthen the bones? Like, no, we don't want to stretch the bones. And like, okay, well, it's a triangle. I'm boxed in. What do you want me to do? And they're like, well, it should, the rig's broken. Can you fix it? And I'm like, okay, I don't know how to explain a triangle to you any other ways, but let's try this, right? And so we took the rig of the rig, and usually this rig was stripped out before it was pushed out to animation. But instead of, we removed the post-process that stripped it out, and we let it go out to the floor with that in there. And so we had the animator sit there with their pose, and we played with the rest state. We played with the joint placement of the knee, and we just tapped it a bump. And the thigh bone got a tiny bit shorter and the shin got a little bit longer, but the knee and the pose shot straight up. And if we had been trying to take stabs in the dark on what would fix that character through traditional iterations of build, test, it would have taken us weeks probably to get the right thing. Definitely days, right? And instead, it took us minutes. And so the power of having access to be able to do procedural rigging and re-rig on the fly for something that's in a posed animated state, it's hard to calculate just how much of an impact that can have on a production, just how fast you can get going with these things. So it's a pretty cool experiment, which is why I built this, to show people that you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. But now with the 2022, you have this Falloff deformer that you can use this now, that was done with the proximity map, but now you can use with more deformers the same approach. So it's way easier to have these Falloffs moving around with your joints and stuff, so you can move around more easily and more visually everything. That's the
so the Falloffs are slightly different than the proximity route. They're both procedural, but there's a little bit something extra going there. So what Falloffs are is they're basically weight functions, and these weight functions don't get evaluated at the time. They're passed off to the deformer, and a deformer, given a geometry, evaluates the weight function against that geometry. So that's what makes them topology independent. So what it means is you can build a network of Falloffs, and you can feed them to a deformer, and that deformer can use it on multiple geometries, or you could take that same network and you can feed it to a different deformer, and that deformer can be working on a different set of topology or the same set of topology. It doesn't matter. That's what makes it topology independent, is the fact that it's creating this function that is not evaluated until it gets to the deformer, which knows which set of Falloffs and which geometry it needs to evaluate for. So it's really, really powerful in that way. And I mean, I could show you one of the most simple Falloffs. I'll get to it. Let's see here. Let's see. The most simple Falloff is the primitive Falloff. Oh, this shows you the graph of the component tags. So here you can see the old style where you have group IDs and group parts. And the other thing is tweak nodes. We now create tweak nodes on demand as opposed to all the time. So when you create a deformer now, instead of your graph looking like this, it looks like this. So much cleaner, much easier to edit by hand. Let's see here. So if I go to Falloffs, we'll skip forward to Falloffs here. Here we go, Falloffs. So there's primitive Falloffs. So these can work on most of the common deformers. Not every deformer in Maya is Falloff compatible yet. We hit the major ones, and then as we get requests, we'll look at enabling them for others. There's just only so many that you can roll them out for. But this is a primitive Falloff, which is one that is used to define weights spatially. So this is using this spherical function. But the nice thing about the sphere is you can shape the sphere however you want. You can scale it through the transform. Through the Falloff itself, you can just grow the positive X or just the negative X, or you can shape them up just in about any way. And these have an inner Falloff and an outer Falloff. So right now, what you don't see, because the inner Falloff is at 0, there's actually an inner sphere, an inner shell, which will be denoted by a solid line. And you see this outer Falloff line denoted by this dotted line. You can visualize the weights as you deal with this. So you can kind of pick up here what's happening. You can play with the curve of the fall off. Besides a sphere, you can switch this to be a planar fall off, where everything on one side of a plane is 0 and everything on the other side is 1. But like I said, I keep calling it the fall off system. A lot of people look at these primitive fall offs and think of these as the Maya fall offs. These are just a type of Maya fall off. There's other types. One of the other types of fall off is called a blend fall off, which is simply a fall off that combines multiple other fall offs, and it'll combine them using compositing operations. So here you can see two primitive fall offs used together. And what I've done with this one on the far left that's under his nose, notice it's inside out. The solid lines on the outside and the dotted lines on the inside, I reversed it. So the first line defines the area we want to affect. And then the second fall off is defining the areas that we're going to carve out. That's why it's negated. Right? So it's going to subtract from this other one. But it's actually multiplying against it. But because everything inside this one is 0, it's going to have the effect of removing it from the effect of the deformation. So here you can see how now these two have been put together using this blend fall off. But you can build up a network. Here's what a blend fall off looks like right there. And you can see there's the different operators. So these get, like, divide is kind of garbage on this one. It means nothing, right? But you could use really interesting mathematical processes to get the weight that you want on these verts. The other thing that's nice is that all these fall offs will multiply against the effects of the traditional weight list. So if you have a traditional weights painted on these things, those will multiply against the effects of a fall off. So if you want to use both, you can use both. So types of fall offs, there are these primitive fall offs, which can be spherical or planar. There's blend fall offs. There's one called uniform fall off, which is just nice to apply a static value across the entire scene to be used in the blend fall off. Like if you want to just offset everything by a value of 1 or by a value of 0.1, you can throw a uniform fall off in there. There is, let's see, what did I say? The most important one for people that are transitioning from skin weights is component fall off, which is just a weight table. It'll just hold values. So it's just like holding a wait list for weights, but it's topology independent in the sense that the component fall off, you can tell it what geometry it was created for. But then there's another node called transfer fall off that can then remap that onto any other topology, which allows something that has per vertex weights to be something that maybe was painted. It allows you to treat those in a topology independent way by using a transfer fall off to remap them to something else.
So this fall off, I guess it's gonna work more in space, like these transfer fall off. It's gonna work in a like world space, so you have a similar volume, something. Or it's a UV. How do you?
I would have to double check. So we put different spaces in here. So one, the primitive fall off can work on original geometry or current geometry. So if you have your original geometry by default, or sorry, your fall off is going to work on the original geometry by default. But if you have a deformation chain that's moved something in some way, and you actually want to work on the results of that deformation chain, you can set the primitive fall off to work in its current vertex mode, which will allow it to work on the deformed state of the character, which is kind of cool. These things are associated in kind of object parent space, so you want to parent it to the same thing that your geometry is parented to. The transfer fall off, I'll have to check. I believe it's going to bind in object space. So I think the rebinding is going to be done effectively in parent space. I'll have to double check on that. I could be wrong, but if people want different modes, we can look at expanding the different modes of how these things bind. Let me pull up my real quick and double check what we have there in terms of if I look at the transfer fall off. The transfer fall off, do we have options? No, it doesn't currently have an option. It's an object space bind currently. World space wouldn't be very useful, but we could put it in. I think rigging in world space is a bad habit that people have gotten into because of the way that Maya's skin cluster works. I think skin cluster has encouraged world space workflows way more than is healthy.
I see. That's really, yeah, definitely. There is I think also these kind of tools open a lot of space for experimentation. I think like playing around, pulling around, like a sandbox. And as you see, like there is a lot of people already posting some nice experiments or some nice stuff that probably you don't thought that the people will come up with these solutions using the tools that you release, like, and yeah, we will find new ways to use the new tools to create new workflows that were not even in the roadmap or in any like original planning.
So that's the thing. It's interesting. I see people referring to things as this doesn't, you can use this thing. If you hack it together, you can make this work. If you hack it together, you make that work. Or you see people that are experimenting. The idea of what we want to do with proceduralism is we want to build up a modular system, right? We want to build up something that gives you common building blocks that you can assemble together to make bigger building blocks, bigger building blocks. So you have a system of inheritance, right? So using these things, there is no off-script way to use these things. If you're using them correctly. You're using them as they're intended, right? We want to see the cool things that you can make happen with that. But like, for example, you can take a skin cluster, or sorry, not skin, you can take a cluster and you can take some Falloffs and you can script together something that will blow the soft mod out of the water. A much better tool, way more robust than the soft mod, and it'll be faster, right? And so just because you can build that up doesn't mean, oh, hey, somebody's hacked together a soft mod. It means, look, you've done the right thing. You've taken these building blocks and you've assembled them together in a way that you've made this other tool that's common to Maya obsolete. And if you standardize on that way of working, that means now when we go and we improve or we fix a bug in one of these inherited pieces, everything benefits. You don't end up with just this tiny little thing over here where it's like, oh, hey, the math is weird on this one deformer. Great, we fix it. And they're like, great, but that math is still broken on all these other deformers. So I'm like, oh, great, we'll take the time and go fix it everywhere, right? We want to put together a system where there is a proper notion of inheritance so that there is an economy of scale, right? And that you get some sort of payoff that, like, you want to amortize your work across everybody else who's using these tools. So the idea of building these up as building blocks is extremely key. So I don't see any of those things as hacky, and I also don't see any of those things as using them as they weren't intended. They might be using them in a way I never imagined, but it's awesome to see, right?
Yeah, there's no such a thing as cheating. It's just I would say like innovative forms to use the tools that are available for you, or creative ways to use the tools. It's yeah, absolutely. The yeah, I mean I think we passed the 1 hour mark, so it was so fast. I just maybe we can start wrapping the thing. I want to talk, if you like, one of the deformers that are also interesting. We have the solidified deformer, but I think this is one, it's very clear, self-explanatory what it does, but I'm very interested on the Morph Deformer. So what's it? I mean, for the people that are wondering, what's? I mean, it's similar to plane shape deformer, but it's not the same by any means. So
yeah, no, it's not the same at all. So, all right, I can't skip over Solidify. Can we just show it real quick?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, Solidify. It's I mean, awesome. Yeah, it's super cool. It's just like, for me, it's so clear what he does that I sorry, I wanted to skim it on that.
I just wanted. Let me just show the video super quick. So this is the idea of being able to just worry about skin weights. You see the horn is just getting destroyed, right? And we have this deformer that uses a component tags where you can say, look, just make the horn solid. And the horn is solid, right? And the back horn is still shearing, right? You see the back horn still shearing. And so we're like, hey, through these expressions, like this one really brings it all together, where it starts, showing you how these component tags can be used in really interesting ways. So they add that back horn and it just goes together. Now, if you think about a user trying to do this without this, you're talking about trying to create a transform that's going to follow the skin at the base of the nose and build that coordinate system. And then you're going to go create some rigid set of geometry that you're going to blend shape back into it. And you need that to follow, and then you need to blend the edge. all of that handled in a GPU accelerated, really quick deformer. So I don't want to go into deep detail about it, but know it's there and play with it because it is awesome.
So it's like the Mandalorian. This is the way, but now not anymore.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I absolutely love it. So, anyways, I couldn't skip it. So the Morph Deformer, so the blend shape deformer is kind of this uber morphing tool that Maya has always had, right? And it does more jobs than it should do, which means it gets overused, which means there's areas of it where it gets bogged down. It makes the code hard to maintain. It makes it hard to touch. And so there's a lot of kind of weird use cases of it, but it's what people have been forced to use, right? And what this Morph Deformer does is it takes away a slice of the use cases for the blend shape. It's not a replacement for the blend shape, but it takes certain use cases of the blend shape and it reduces the need for using the blend shape in those cases, right? So one thing about this is a nice GPU accelerated deformer, so it's really fast. But all this is not going to go let you blend multiple shapes together. This is an A/B morph. You have one shape, you want to blend it to the other shape, that's it, right? You're going to blend from this shape to that shape, and that's all you're going to do. So it handles that. And so because this thing is GPU accelerated, and remember way back somewhere at the middle of this talk, we were talking about the fan-in design pattern being unblocked now. So if you have legacy deformers, something you've written in-house, something that's only evaluating on the CPU, something that doesn't evaluate on GPU, before, if you would use that legacy deformer in your deformation chain, everything upstream of it would be blocked from GPU evaluation, even if it was a GPU accelerated deformer. So your rig would automatically slow down. With the Morph Deformer, what you can do is you can take your legacy deformation, do your legacy deformation, and then merge it into an existing GPU deformation chain using the Morph Deformer. And while this deformation is still be evaluating on the CPU, it will no longer block all those upstream deformations from landing on the GPU. So that means now you can use this as a bit of legacy support to get around some of these CPU evaluation deformers. So again, it's not going to magically put your CPU deformer on the GPU, but it will prevent that CPU deformer when using this Morph Deformer in the fan and design pattern. It will prevent that CPU deformer from blocking a ton of your chain from getting on the GPU, which can be very powerful.
Yeah, I use that a lot for facial rigging. Especially, it's a huge fan in all the little parts of the facial. I mean, you can boil it down to one, let's say, layer, but it's way more complex and also maintainability, and you have a lot of limitations or what you can do. But so I guess I mean, many people use this kind of design. So you add layers on layers on the facial until you get a very complex deformation system based on very simple rigs that are doing only one simple thing. So it's easy to edit while you have the complexity. Here, of course, what I'm doing right now with all Maya versions is I am funning this on the on the blend shape. I mean, some people likes to use like some direct mesh out connections, things like that. But I used to use blend shapes because it's a bit cleaner and in the way that, I mean, it's easier to digest as a user from the user point of view, and you can normally I found maybe 2 in 1 or things like that. But but yeah, definitely like using the Morph, I have to check on and what I do. But I normally, when it's like one live blend shape or like mini rig that does something and it's live connected to the next stage, that it's for what is this now, like instead of using the blend shape here, just funneling with the
this is a great way to merge two rigs. Like if you have a face rig that you want to blend into a body rig, like you're going to keep your face rig separate and then you're just going to blend it in, to the head. The cool thing about this is it has a lot of modes to it. So, it can be in an absolute mode, a relative mode. It can be in surface mode. It works in different spaces. It can work in object space or world space. One of the really cool things about it, though, is the component lookup feature. So this can use a lookup table to determine which vert is going to drive which. So there's the difference between a morph and a bind. If you have two matching topologies and you want to have one drive the other, you could use something like a proximity wrap, but that's overhead, because what it's doing is it's finding the closest point on the other surface. It's looking for the coordinate system. It's maintaining some sort of delta, which, because they're matching topologies, there is no delta, but it's still calculating it, even though the delta is 0. And so it's building this whole coordinate and all this extra overhead, right?
Yes.
Or you could simply say, look, we have matching topology. I'm just going to say I'm vertex 10, that's vertex 10. I'm just going to take vertex 10's position and I'm going to go there, right? There's no real calculation. It's just a straight lookup from one vert table to another and just say, match that surface, what it's doing, right? The problem is with blend shape is you'll see a lot of people's workflow where they'll have a character where it's the whole character, head and body. And then they're going to do a bunch of blend shape targets for the face, right? And what they'll do is they'll cut off the head and they'll copy the head, have all the copies of the head because they don't want the whole body there. They're just working on the face.
I'm guilty.
Right? They go sculpt all those faces, but now those faces can't be blend shaped back onto this character because they have a mismatched topology. So what's the trick that everybody knows? Well, you go back to modeling and you say, look, cut off the head. And when you recombine it, combine it so that that head starts at index 0 of the vertex table. So now when I create the blend shape, it'll work. And I can take this mismatched topology where I only have 1,000 verts for the head, but I have 10,000 verts for the whole character. I can now use the blend shape because it'll just start at index 0 and everything will work because we've done this little modeling hack to make it work. And that I do think is a hack, right? Well, what happens when you have a two-headed character? What happens when, you need to do, a set for the face and another set for the hands? You can't. You can only do that trick once per mesh because only one mesh can be at index 0.
Yeah.
So what this morph target does is you can use subsets to drive, you can use a subset to drive a more complete set. You can use a complete set to drive a subset, any which way you want. And what it does is it uses a lookup table. So rather than saying, hey, by default, it's just going to use vert table, just like blend shape does. But we can use this component lookup mode, which will then go through this component match node, which right now component match is simply using proximity to figure out which vert should be the same. But we could potentially provide new methods, or people could provide new nodes of defining this lookup table, right? You could say, oh, I'm going to use some kind of fingerprint. I'm going to say not just vert location, but I need to look at my neighbors too, because what if I have coincident verts, right? Which one is the right one to follow, right? You could have all kinds of lookup issues, but this gives you the ability to deal with this component match node, which is going to build a lookup table and let you drive a sub with a hole. So in this video that you see on my screen right now, this character is being driven by two morphs. One morph is doing the head, one morph is doing the hair, right? So this is one whole mesh, but I've cut off his head, I've cut off his hair, and they're both working simultaneously because of this component match node in here that's feeding to these two morph targets. You'll also notice that this guy has a skin cluster on him. His head is tilted back, and this jaw is applying in surface space. So it's building a coordinate system for the deformation entirely based on the surface space. It doesn't care how you get there. It's not looking at joints. It's not looking at transforms from a skin cluster to build a coordinate system. It's simply evaluating the surface to build a coordinate system for this deformation. And you can see here, I can tilt his head back and this jaw is applying in the correct space. Same thing with the hair.
The component match, it's node, it's specially designed to work with Morph, or we can use it in other different deformers?
So,
well, right now,
we designed it to work with Morph because that's the only consumer. I think if people saw another need for building a component lookup, then this would be the node we would expand to do that. Right now, we don't have other use cases that would take advantage of this, but the Morph Deformer does, so it's built for that. But
blend shape node
split it out.
It cannot take also this one as the blend shape, the old one.
Currently, no, it can't. But the reason it's a separate node and not logic that the Morph Deformer does itself is because we want these modular pieces. So even though we don't have a use case for it now, if we ever do have a use case for it, here we have this node special, the special purpose node that can build they build these lookup tables, and we would be able to feed it to this other deformer. If it was part of the Morph Deformer, then we would have already forked it, right? We would have said, oh, well, the Morph Deformer does it natively. And then this other new deformer, well, it uses this other methodology, and we wouldn't be sharing our code base in that sense.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, if you have, like, for instance, on the hair, you can have this hair moving, but let's say I want to do two frequencies, one high frequency in the tips and lower frequency on the on the base. So you have two geometries that will have the same mapping, let's say component mapping. So you can reuse the same node into morphs to do exactly the same mapping. No? That's I mean,
you could reuse the component match.
Yeah, exactly
what
I'm
it's the
saying.
same two geometries.
Yeah,
then you can feed that over. It's going to use the same lookup. And this is just an example that takes the planar fall off and the morph and combines them together to show you how you could do something that is traditionally very difficult in Maya extremely simply. Like this is the entire deformation network. What you have here is on the left, you have a character that's rigged with a jaw, but his lips aren't rigged to open. And on the right, you have the character where his lips are rigged to open. And in the middle, we're just blending between the two, and we're feeding the envelope of the Morph Deformer with this animated fall off. And you can see we're doing a lip seal very easily. It's dirt simple to do.
That's that normally they make the zipper or
you got somebody's trying to do it with curves and like trying to
that's a lot
can get real ugly real fast.
It can get pricey for the rig, let's say.
And the nice thing is if there is something you're getting out of that other methodology that you're not getting out of this, we're not taking anything away from you. You just have more bags or more tools in your bag, right? Like you have more tricks to work with and more tools that let you pull these things off. And my hope is that people migrate towards the more procedural workflows so they can really take advantage of everything that we're trying to build for them.
It's super. I mean, I'm just I just need to carve time or to. I hope we can start production with 2022, so I can put my hands in all these nice improvements, because honestly, there's a lot of goodness here, and just want it now.
I mean, I when 2020 came out, I liked to say that it was the biggest rigging release that Maya had ever had. I don't think anybody had ever made that many changes to rigging in Maya. In 2022 dwarfs the 2020 release in terms of what we've put into it. So the last 2 years in terms of rigging changes, everything is backwards compatible. So nothing forces you to change the way you work. We haven't deprecated workflows. We haven't gotten rid of anything that you use, but we've enabled so much that anybody who embraces the tools that are in 2020 and 2022 will be rigging using an entirely different paradigm than you have over the last 20 years. And it works side by side with the paradigm you've been using, and it just keeps adding power to it. So I would highly recommend that riggers pay attention to it, test it, dive into it, try to familiarize yourself with it, because it really is changing the way. These are not small features. These are foundational shifts in what you can do with rigging in Maya. So it's well worth grabbing. And a lot of these features look very simple and basic, but that's because these are the building blocks at the foundation level. It's what you do when you combine them that's really going to unlock a tremendous amount of power.
I think it's the base for like the Lego pieces that we need to use day by day. So, and later you can create systems that take these base pieces and create something more, let's say, that it's more let's say template, or that you have all to put together for a specific solution for, like, let's say this kind of phase or this kind of topology or this kind of project. So you can package all together and create these like templates or pre-rigs, or I don't know how to call it, like, or auto rig, maybe.
I mean, and there's I think auto rig systems are fantastic, and I'm glad there's a ton of them out there. I mean, like I've said, Maya is a framework, which is why there are. I mean, it's an awesome foundation. If you look at the biggest pieces of entertainment over the last 20 years, they're all using Maya to do character work, right? So while there are a lot of people that are very frustrated with the shortcomings they come up with and stuff, or what they've had to implement on their own on top of Maya, they have to remember that Maya is the thing that also enabled them to build that framework on top of Maya. Maya is extensible, really extensible, that allows all those things to be built. And that is a lot of the power of it, right? But you should be leveraging those frameworks, but all those frameworks right now are all built on scripted builds, right? And what I would love to see is I want to see those frameworks migrate from scripted build, I guess scripted build to maybe a scripted creation. But once it's created, you shouldn't have to be rerunning scripts. You shouldn't constantly, every time something changes, have to go rebuild or go through a process where you're hitting a button and you're waiting for something to regenerate, right? You should be able to edit the rig in place. And there's always going to be a need for the scripted setup. Like, here's my library of parts. Here's how the parts are assembled. Here's the tool that helps me intuitively lay those parts out and assemble them together. That is the domain of a tool. Absolutely. Whether it's a Maya tool or a third-party tool, that's the domain that needs to be there, right? You don't want to build a character from scratch every time. You want to leverage those tools. But once you've assembled it, I don't want to keep hitting rebuild. I don't want to wait 30 minutes, or I don't want to wait 30 seconds for that build. I just want to get there and edit the thing.
I agree totally. I think both approaches has its own space, and they can, the ideal it's a mix between these two when it's needed, So for instance, I'm a big advocate, like what I call the data-centric approach for rigging. But obviously we rebuild every single time, but I don't think like this approach, the brighter part it's that in terms of rebuilding the same rig over and over, that obviously there is a lot of like taking this approach that you can say, but it's not to rebuild one, it's to the many. And there is when it makes if you serialize all your data and split, and you have 100 characters and you need to rebuild these 100 characters from one. Obviously it would be nice to have, once it's built the asset, as you say, to have the flexibility to keep editing that. But if you need to process some big amounts of like assets, it's obviously you need to rebuild or build each one of these characters. Let's say even it's not a actual rebuild, it's one new build for each character, and you want to take this data and share it among these assets as much as you can, so you do the less work possible. It sounds lazy, but it's the way to go. Actually,
that's I mean, like, I'm a huge proponent of working smart, working hard. Like, I've come across people who get into the zen of spending a week painting weights, and it's like, that's great, but that's a huge waste of your time. You could be doing so many more things than that, right? And you're right about when it comes to scale, like. But I also think that I think about that as a problem of like nested modularity, right? Once I have built up a standard character from reusable pieces, that character should be reusable. The system of inheritance shouldn't be broken. I should then be able to have other characters inherit from that character, right? It's not necessarily a build with each character. It could just be, I've built this character, maybe it's a refit for a different character. And now when I make changes at the base level, that inheritance allows it to propagate through everything, right? And obviously, if you do something that's heavily inheritance-based or file referencing based, you want it to be a gated system where it's a push-pull system. You don't want to make a change and everything gets it whether they want it or not, right? You want something that's intelligent enough that gives the user some choice on whether they're taking certain changes. But you want a system that can do that, where if I make a tweak to the way a pinky works, that pinky is going to propagate to, this robot arm that's using it. It's going to propagate to this character, and it's going to propagate to these 300 characters in a crowd sim that were derived from that one character, right? I want to be able to do that without having to go everywhere and rebuild, right? And that's a bit pie in the sky. We're not there. That's a lot of machinery that would need to be built to make all that happen. But I want to enable that to be done, right? I really want to remove the barriers to working that way. Because it's a way that I've been very comfortable working in the past, and I've seen how efficient working that way can be. And I know, I know how fast a production can move, and I know how much rigging can be turned from a production bottleneck into a production asset. right? Where it becomes the accelerant for the entire production that allows modeling and animation and lighting and everybody to work sooner and faster. And in too many studios, rigging is the bottleneck. It's like, oh gosh, modelers are hesitant to touch a model because if I make this change, it's going to screw rigging, and then it's going to be God knows how long before that change makes it through the pipeline. I want everybody to be able to do their job in a way where they can just focus on what they're doing and not have to think about, if I split this poly, have I just hosed 300 characters in a crowd sim, right? You shouldn't have to. That should never be a thought that runs through a modeler's head. Right?
I mean, it is, and I mean, this, there's I think a lot of nuances and complexity when you're managing these kind of things. But yeah, definitely every step forward to remove these kind of barriers, these kind of blockers that we have on the pipeline part, definitely are, I mean, very needed. I will say that's the word. But yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Thank you. I think maybe we can wrap here. I don't know if we missed something on our bullet points, but I'm really happy to have you today here and to you taking the time to explain me all these new features and all the stuff, and well, and all the all the things that we talk here, because I thought it was a lot of good, really great information, and it was also really nice to meet you and to know the person behind all these new changes that are coming to Maya in the recent years. That it's always great to, I know you're working with a big team and it's a lot of people working there, but it's always great to see or to meet the people that makes this happening every year.
Yeah, thanks, man. And that's one thing that I'm glad you brought it up because, you know, I'm just lucky enough to get to talk to people about this. And, I have my part on the team, but it's an extremely talented team, very bright people, from QA through devs, through docs, like it's amazing the amount of work that goes into this. And I'm just lucky enough to kind of get to be the face of that and talk to people about it. And it's really nice to see, these things realized within Maya. So it's definitely a team effort, and I'm very, very happy that I get to be the one to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah, great meeting you.